Board Officer Anderson arriving, USS LaSalle LPD-3. In 1966, I was transferred to the LaSalle as the electrical officer. The LaSalle was built in the Brooklyn Navy Yard and entered service in 1964. LaSalle was named for the city in Illinois that in turn named after René Robert Chevalier Sieur de LaSalle. LaSalle saw service in the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and throughout the international waters of the Middle East, and served as a command ship for the Joint Task Force Middle East. In 2005, the ship was decommissioned and sunk as a target ship off the Atlantic coast of the United States in 2007. She had an interesting design feature in that she had a flag bridge, making her one deck higher than the LPD-1 and 2, and consequently too tall to go under the Brooklyn Bridge. Therefore, the mast was hinged so as allowed to be lowered and go under the bridge. My roommate, Lieutenant David Hawkins from Lower Salem, Ohio. David was very smart and trained as a merchant mariner, serving as the main control assistant, the MPA. One of my favorite sea stories about David is once he came up from the engine room with no tie and his sleeves were rolled up, and the executive officer said to him, "Mr. Hawkins, the dress for dinner in the wardroom is with black tie, sir." David excused himself, went to his stateroom, came back in a few minutes with a clown black tie. It was about 6 inches wide. And the XO asked, "Is that a regulation tie, Mr. Hawkins?" To which David replied, "Sir, Navy regulation states black tie. This is a black tie." While in LaSalle, we were detailed to the South Atlantic to recover a space capsule, a Gemini 11B, a part of the MOL test program to recover a refurbished Gemini 2 capsule that had a door in the heat shield. The MOL test launch, November 1966 from Cape Canaveral, Florida. The MOL was launched on 3 November at 1350 Universal Time on a Titan 3C-9 from Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 40. The flight consisted of the MOL mock-up built from a Titan II propellant tank and a refurbished capsule from the Gemini 2 mission as a prototype for the Gemini B spacecraft. After the Gemini B prototype separated from a suborbital reentry, the MOL mock-up continued in orbit and released 3 satellites. A hatch installed in the Gemini's heat shield, intended to provide access to the manned orbiting laboratory during the crewed operation, was tested during the capsule's reentry. The Gemini capsule was recovered near Ascension Island in the South Atlantic by the USS LaSalle after a flight of only 33 minutes. Note it took the LaSalle 12 days, steaming at 17 knots in a straight line to get there. The capsule got there in 33 minutes. The Gemini 2 capsule was used in the only flight test of the MOL program. It's on display at the Air Force Space and Missile Museum in Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. On the way to Ascension Island, we crossed the Equator. For any of you out there that have ever been across the Equator, you know the Navy has a big initiation ceremony for the polywogs. The polywogs are those that have never been across the Equator. The shellbacks, those that have been across and initiated, every evening they would have a meeting, and the announcement on the ship's PA system was all shellbacks assemble in SAC. SAC was the Strategic Arms and Coordinating and Control Center. We polywogs wanted to know what they're planning to do to us, so I looked in the room, the Strategic Arms and Control Center, and looked around, and there was a shore telephone conveniently taped to a large desk where the shellbacks were meeting. I had the IC electricians to take the hook switch springs out of the phone that enables the phone to be off hook. The mouthpiece now becomes a microphone. We then hooked it up via the ship's telephone system to our stateroom, and Mr. Hawkins had a fancy tape recorder, and we recorded every shellback meeting. We would then invite the chaplain, who was also a polywog, to listen and select a punishment plan for us. And then about 21:30 in the evening news with Walter Crankcase, just before the evening prayer, the chaplain would announce what the shellbacks were planning to do to us, thus and so. The shellbacks suspected us, but they didn't learn about it the phone tap. But they selected me and David and the chaplain to be first in the punishment line for the shellback ceremony. And needless to say, they poured it on to us. The captain heard about the recording and asked to hear it. He told the admiral about it, and the admiral called me up to his cabin and said, "You wouldn't be recording anything you're not supposed to, would you?" "No, sir." Headline, March 1967. USS LaSalle collides with the Israeli freighter Dagania in the fog off Cape Henry. Both ships suffered minor damage. I was on watch in the main engine control room, number 1, responsible for the operation of the propulsion auxiliary electrical plants. We had 2 boilers online, 2 generators, 2 main engines, steaming about 15 knots. My routine was to call up to the pilot house and speak to the officer of the deck and find out if we were having any drills exercises. The officer of the deck said no drills, no maneuvers, no speed changes. I would then go down to the fire room and talk with the boiler tenders, the BTs, and then go down below the distilling plant and check all the motors for overheating and pumps for leaks. I was down below the distilling plant and I heard the engine order telegraph ringing loudly and frequently. I ran up to the engine control board and asked to watch what happened. He said the engine order telegraph went crazy, went then back full. I said, that meant 140 turns on the main engines. I told the throttleman, bring it up to 140 turns, that's emergency back. Called the number 2 engine room, got on the phone and told them to get on the stick and make 140 turns. This is an emergency. The collision alarm sounded, and the ship was backing full emergency and shuddering as we turned away from the Dagania. Then the general quarters alarm sounded, and everyone rushed to their GQ stations. I was relieved by the chief engineer signing the bell book and the log, and went up to the repair 5, which was the engineering repair locker. Machinist mate Chief Claiborne from St. Croix was my assistant in the repair locker, and he came down with his big eyes and British accent and asked, "Is this the real thing or is this a drill?" I said, "This is a real thing, Chief." The collision occurred as we were turning away. The stern of the Dagania hit our bow and knocked a 12 by 14-foot hole in our bow and bounced off, hit the port accommodation ladder. The port motor whale boat collapsed the port wing wall. The collision threw the motor whaleboat on the Dagania and tore half of the motor whaleboat deck off, which sank in the water. Captain Clark was so ashamed we pulled into Norfolk, he put the stern in first, bow out to sea so people couldn't see the damage. The repairs cost several $100,000 and Captain Clark would have made admiral, but for the collision he was transferred to the Naval Air Station in New Mexico, I think. We received a new captain, H.L. Matthews. While in the shipyard, the shore power cables overheated and caught on fire, and there was a big fire on the old wind level at the shore power connection box. And about 1 a.m., I woke up hearing the running and whooshing of CO2 bottles, and by the time the fire department got there, I asked the chief to turn off the power. And he said he couldn't because they couldn't get into the vault below the deck because it had a special lock on it. Later, power was turned off. And I ran down to the forward engine room and opened up the shore power breaker, ran back to the forward emergency diesel room and started it, restoring emergency power to the ship. No one was injured, but 41 CO2 bottles were found at the scene of the fire. We got out of the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. The USS Plymouth Rock was just ahead of us and sent a message to the CO. Said, "Nice nose job. Who's your doctor?" Our CO replied, "The same one that did your appendicitis." She had been in there to replace her boiler tubes. We headed for Miami, and on the way, the ship began to vibrate heavily. The vibration coming from the port propeller. We went on into Miami on our way to New Orleans for Navy Day. There's a strong current requiring expert navigation to get into the channel. The pilot was not experienced in navigating a ship with such a large sail area, and he gave the wrong rudder angle and almost put the ship into the channel sideways. The navigator was late in telling the IC electrician to raise the pitch sword and bent the pitch sword. That's the underwater log, measures ship speed. The near grounding coming into the channel resulted in bending the sword, and they couldn't raise it up. I had to go tell the commanding officer about the rod meter being bent, and he asked what we had to do to fix it. I told him I'd have to go get a rod meter extraction kit and install a new sword. He thought I was getting smart with him, and I had to explain the whole process in detail about replacing the bent sword. While in Miami, we ballasted down by the bow, raised the stern as high as possible, and then Mr. Hawkins and Chief Engineer Lieutenant Fellhofer used a scuba mask and looked at the propeller. One blade was broken, another was bent, and this was caused when the boat deck fell into the water during the collision with the Dagania. We limited our speed to 15 knots and proceeded to Key West, where Navy divers came on board and verified the broken and bent propeller. We went on to New Orleans, Louisiana for Navy Day, and then sailed up to Baltimore to the Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock for underwater hull or propeller repairs. The bottom hull looked like a big cat had scratched it, caused by almost grounding in Miami. When Captain Matthews came on board, he told the Admiral that he would fix that hydraulic leak around the crane. Well, he did this by having us weld a 3-inch high metal dam around the base of the crane with a drain below into a barrel. Once the transformer on the 440 120 volt transformer burned out, and we had no power to control the crane, and there was nothing in our spare parts would fit in the enclosure. I looked around, noted a 120 volt outlet nearby, and I had the electricians rig up a portable cable around the crane and connect it to the 120 volt circuit in the crane and plug in the outlet. The boatswain said he wasn't going to run the crane on 120 volt power. I told him I would do it, so he came up and used it on the way. Then we got in port and replaced the transformer. I was assigned to replace Mr. Hawkins as he was being transferred. I was assigned as the MPA, the Main Propulsion Assistant. And this required a lot of study, as I had to supervise the maintenance and repair and operation of the main propulsion plants, the main engine, the auxiliary steam systems, and electrical generators. I had been well prepared for this because I had trained a lot on the USS Northampton, the ship before LaSalle. In 3 April 1969, Timothy was born at the Portsmouth Naval Hospital. I was in transmit from the Mediterranean and received a telegram. Congratulations, your wife has given birth to a baby boy. Mother and child satisfactory. Wow. What does that mean, satisfactory? Well, in March 2005, I had the wonderful opportunity to go on board the LaSalle and to ride her from Philadelphia to Norfolk, where were several ex-crew members on the trip. We were invited to make the final cruise before the ship was decommissioned. I had attended the decommissioning of the USS Seattle AOE-3, my fourth ship in Norfolk, the day before our departure from Philadelphia. I rented a car and drove up with David and Ruth Hawkins and Bobby Hamby from Norfolk to Philadelphia. We had a great time of fellowship while driving up. Security was very high because of 9/11. And we had no one who was allowed on the ship without specific invitation and ID cards. We drove to the airport in Philly and obtained a cab to go to the Patriots Point shipyard. And the cab driver told us that he used to be on the ship. We doubted that, but he said, I'd like to go aboard and take a look around. We arrived at the gate at the Patriot Point, and a guard with a carbine. He told the driver to back that cab up. You're too close to the gate. He did not get to go aboard. Our ID and letter of invitation were checked, and we boarded a bus to take us down to the ship. Our IDs and invitation were checked again at the foot ladder of the accommodation, and we boarded, only to arrive too late for the evening meal. There was some fruit and jelly rolls left, which we enjoyed. We were assigned our bunk rooms, what used to be the troop officers' quarters, just around the passageway from my old stateroom. We could not see our old stateroom as the officer in there were not on board, and it was locked. The next morning we got underway from Philly, and I saw something I had never seen during my 22 and a half years of service on 5 different Navy ships. They had 50 caliber machine guns loaded and manned on the bow, 2 on the bow, 2 forward of the pilot house, 2 aft of the pilot house, 2 on the fantail for protection from possible terrorist boats. I spent my morning at the sea detail on the open bridge above the pilot house taking photos. During my times in the other ships, I was always below and did not get to see the events of a sea detail from topside. We were given the free rein to go anywhere on the ship we wanted, and David and I visited the engineering log room and chatted with an engineer officer who gave us a green engineering training cap. We wanted a red one, but he gave us this green one. So now when I go to a reunion, I wear a distinctive green cap. I visited both engine rooms, took a lot of photos, talked with the crew, thoroughly enjoyed the trip. David climbed down into the after steering, a long climb of several feet on a vertical ladder. I chose not to do that. I have a lot of photos of the trip, which I'll show you during this film. The USS Seattle was being towed to Philadelphia from Norfolk for removal of equipment in preparation for her disposal in Brownsville, Texas. So Captain Szymanski, the CEO of LaSalle, maneuvered over toward the Seattle and was able to get some photos of her. It was March and very cold and rainy when we arrived in Norfolk. David, Ruth, and I stayed at the Navy Lodge in Fort Story, Virginia, a very nice place. The next day we went to the local fish restaurant where David ate about 3 plates of oysters on a half shell. Maybe it was 6, I don't know. He likes them. We enjoyed the fellowship and departed. We came back to Norfolk for the decommissioning ceremony in 2005, and we really enjoyed the attendance with several ships reunions since. Unfortunately, both David and Ruth have passed on. David in 2019. I have an in memory ceremony of David that he held at one of our ceremonies. I'll put this in here. Then in September 1969, I was promoted to Limited Duty Officer Engineering 01 and sent to the Naval Development Training Center in San Diego for duty. That's all for today. God bless you and your family. Take care. Like my page. Subscribe to my channel. God bless you and have a great day. Bye-bye. Ensign Anderson departing.
Eternal Father.